You're listening to Chad Hartman, weekdays noon to 3 on WCCO and streaming live on WCCO.com.
So we saw a couple stories about this in the last few weeks. It is picking up a fair amount of talk on the webs. We reached out to somebody who knows it very well, is a part of it. We're talking about the men's rights movement. What is it? Why did they start it? And where's it going? Paul Elam is nice enough to join us. Paul is with A Voice for Men. Thanks, Paul. So tell me about the men's rights movement and your group within it.
Glad to be here, Chad. Thanks for having me. Essentially what we are is a group of men and women. It's not a men's group. It's both sexes and diverse backgrounds, racially, ethnically, and in terms of sexual orientation that are re-examining what's happening to men and boys in this culture and speaking up about a lot of issues that we think society is getting wrong.
Such as?
What's happening to men in family courts, what's going on with the problems for young men on college campuses, issues like what happens to men in the media when they're falsely accused of a sexual assault or something to that effect, and how their reputations are damaged and how due process for them has been undermined.
Those are all very legit, and I think those are issues that need to be addressed and probably don't draw enough media attention. I'm with you wholeheartedly. When we first saw this, we looked for stories, and you know this infinitely better than I. If you Google you and your group, a lot of other comments come up. Is it an unfair portrayal, or is there another part of the story that we also should address?
Well, there is certainly some demonization of what happens on my website and other similar websites. Mostly that is what we call comment mining, or going in and cherry-picking pieces of satire or hyperbolic rhetoric that is designed to get attention. But when people come to avoiceformen.com and actually read what's there, they find that 99.99% of it is just addressing the issues that I've just talked about.
So, because I've talked about this a lot on our show, in so many outlets now we have comment sections. And if people are willing to put their names on it, I look at it very differently from an individual who can anonymously throw something up and then, to me, really is a coward and will say things. Are a lot of the more inflammatory comments from people who are anonymously posting, or are those from people who might be going with comments that a lot of people view are atypical, but they'll stand behind them and their name is on it?
Well, that's a complicated question. Let me first say that in terms of comments, there is idiots all over the internet posting really, really crazy things behind screen names. We certainly can't take responsibility for that. Those people we don't view as speaking for anybody in this movement. There are times when the articles we publish are really, really incendiary because we deal with very controversial topics. They tend to offend. They are designed to provoke thought and attention to problems that, as you just pointed out a couple of minutes ago, the media has not done a particularly good job of looking at issues that affect men. And we could go into a million reasons for that. But the real issue here is that we can't just take some idiot on the internet and saying something anonymously and then legitimately attribute that as the voice of a movement. It's not.
In reading, part of your bio, part of what you offered up, what was going on in your life, you said a lot of this came to light for you in what you called, quote unquote, the treatment world, where instead of dealing with the disease, masculinity was a disease. Is that a fair point?
Yeah, I think it is. To clarify, the field I worked in was in addictions counseling. Yep. I was a counselor for 20 years in that. And at a certain point, gender ideologues, feminists to be more honest, really developed a stronghold in the academic world. We see that going rampant today. A lot of their theories about patriarchy, about men being historical oppressors of women and being evil, in a lot of respects got translated into the treatment field. And so we saw a lot of pop literature come out about how bad men were. We saw a lot of books come out for women about the bad, terrible men in their lives. And that got actually translated into how we were treating clients coming into treatment centers. We began treating masculine masculinity like it was a pathology, and treating all women that came in the door like they were victims from the moment they got there, when many times that wasn't the case.
Let me deal with this issue, because it has come up before where individuals have offered up some bold, blunt, and as anti-PC comments as possible, and there's been some blowback on it. And then some people come back and say, well, you're just too sensitive. Or some people will say, it's satire, it's humor. Somebody who you work with, is it Paul Henley? Is that how I say his name?
John Henley.
Sorry about it. He's had some comments about rape, and you could classify him better than I. But when he's taken heat on that, he has said, you don't understand what I was trying to do. I don't know him at all. I'm just reading about him, and I'm saying he could be right, but it's an issue fraught with such a reaction. Aren't you asking for questions when you're trying to bring satire, humor, which I'm all for, but it's involving an issue which is explosive as this, as women and rape?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is asking for questions, and certainly I don't think that all the criticism is unwarranted. But we also have to consider, in order to be totally fair, that there have been men and women for the past 40 years that have been struggling mightily to get these issues on the table, to bring them to the attention of the mainstream media, to get them into the public consciousness, to have them discussed in our institutions of higher education. And they have been flatly rejected because of ideological control in all those areas. So you're going to end up, whenever you have a population of people whose issues are ignored or marginalized over decade after decade, you're eventually going to have some, at the very least, some hyperbole in other populations, in our minority populations, when their problems were ignored for so long. We had much worse happen because of that. It wasn't that anybody is justifying violence or excusing it, but the fact of the matter is, when you push people's issues to the side long enough, they're eventually going to start speaking louder. That's what you're hearing happen now. So I think that's an indication that our society needs to start looking at these issues.
Paul Elam is our guest. We're talking about his group, A Voice for Men, which is garnering a fair amount of reaction. Is a 2020 profile coming up? Am I right about that?
Well, who knows? I went to New York actually months ago and filmed that. They also, a few weeks ago, sent another film crew to my home to do more there. They have released an article that was just an outright libel about the website, about what was said there, totally untrue.
What was the worst thing they said?
Well, what they did, they went back 3 years on the website looking for some sort of violence advocacy. And what they found was an article I wrote in November of 2010 that pulled a comment that some ignorant, anonymous fool left on the site that talked about shooting women and stuff like that. We deleted the comment immediately, and I used it as an example, and I wrote an article telling readers of A Voice for Men that anybody making a comment like that was going to be banned immediately, and if it was even severe enough, we would report them to the police. They 2020 went into that article and lifted that comment that I used as an example of what would not be tolerated on the website, and said, here's what A Voice for Men is promoting.
Let me get to something, and whether this was fair. This was in this lengthy Daily Beast story, which you're really aware of, and I might have been the first time we heard about your group. Again, about John Henley. He likes to tell stories that made him into something of a legend in the men's right movement. This is from Daily Beast, okay? When people call him a rape apologist for making comments like, I don't give an F about women being raped, he trots out a story about jumping in to protect a female stranger from sexual assault. I'm not doubting that he did that. I have nothing to offer that up. But if you offer up this comment, I don't give a blank about women being raped, isn't any story lost? And did he actually offer that comment up?
I believe he did. But I think the comment has also been taken out of context quite a bit. What he was referring to was, and this gets into a very complicated area of understanding what's happening with the definition of rape victims in this culture, what's happening with sexual assaults that happen to men, trying to have discussions about this with gender ideologues that do not want to even acknowledge that there are male victims of sexual assault and that they are numerous in this culture. That in a moment of frustration, he said, okay, that's it, I don't care about women anymore, as a reaction to hearing people repeatedly deny the existence of male victims. Perhaps a poor choice of words. He later retracted them. I don't think that Todd Kelly reflected them fairly in that article or put them into the correct context at all, though, to be fair.
But you understand, if somebody is just hearing about your group and maybe intrigued by some of the ideas, but this other individual is becoming rather prominent, like yourself, says this, people are going to say, how can you take something like that out of context? It's such an insulting comment.
Well, I think it can and was taken out of context. I think we also have to consider that there are a great many people. We have over 10,000 unique visitors a day to the site, and it's growing exponentially. Because, again, what you're talking about, and you're fairly criticizing, is one minuscule aspect of things that happen in very, very heated discussions. 99.99% of what is on that website has enormous appeal to men and women who have been affected by these problems. They come in and read about them in a light that they've never heard before, and they're signing on in droves. So while I certainly I think we take the occasional hit from time to time on some hyperbole, it has not affected our growth. In fact, we're growing at a really, really impressive rate.
Another outlet said it's a legitimate movement, but it has a few extremists, which really isn't that different from what you said. Have you and the others done a good enough job in locating who those few extremists are, maybe even more than comments, if it's people who actually are writing, and flat out firing them if needed? And let me also be pointed on this. When some of the comments are most inflammatory, does that bring in some of the numbers? Are some people drawn to some of the most hateful comments?
Well, sure. I think that some people are drawn to the expressions of anger. A lot of that anger has been repressed for a long time and has not had a venue. We encourage the appropriate expression of anger. Anger is a normal, healthy response to having your problems marginalized, ignored, or denied. We can't have a movement if we're going to deny that anger is a legitimate part of it. Whether or not it crosses over into inappropriate areas, into violence, into advocacy for male supremacy, and these things do come up. So, yeah, these guys wander in from time to time, and occasionally a few women. We show them the door right back out. That's a normal part of our management operations. We don't tolerate misogyny. We don't tolerate advocacy for violence. We don't tolerate supremacy in any form or fashion. We don't tolerate homophobic comments. We have an amazingly diverse group of writers, contributors, and editors at A Voice for Men. If you go on the front page right now, you'll see probably 3/4 of the articles there are written by women, and they're dynamite articles.
Speaking of misogyny, you know that the Southern Poverty Law Center, which draws praise from some, hate from others, has been extraordinarily critical of you and the group. I can hear you chuckle in the background. Are they unfair? Are they cherry picking, or do some of their points resonate?
Well, no, nothing that the SPLC resonates. I mean, and as hyperbolic as it might sound, I really do believe that the SPLC would call their grandmothers Nazis if there was a buck in it. They have gone after groups that's for simply disagreeing with the idea of gay marriage. I don't oppose gay marriage, but they have labeled groups as hate groups just for being opposed to gay marriage. They did some great work back in the 70s. They all but put the Klan out of business, some really, really good contributions to society. But they have become a totally political organization with an agenda, and their idea is to attack anybody that they perceive to be on the right, and we're no exception, although we are really more centrist than anything. We don't take a political stance.
Last thing, about 90 seconds ago. What is the worst thing that prominent feminists are offering up to the country right now?
Right now, they're treating all young men who enter our college campuses, a dwindling population, by the way. They're reducing from 50% 10 years ago to 38% now. If we stay on the trend, we'll have the last bachelor's degree issued to a male in sometime in 2025. We won't stay there, but right now, part of it is just the overtly hostile environment they're creating for young men on college campuses by treating each man as a potential rapist, by having star chamber type proceedings when sexual assault is alleged, not allowing them legal representation, not allowing them to cross-examine people who make accusations against them, and ruining their academic careers based on accusation alone.
Now, what will happen by 2025, the last graduation?
Well, Dr. Miles Groff, somebody who advocates on these issues, has done the math on it, and at the rate of decline of the presence of young men in college right now, we will have issued the last bachelor's degree to a male in 2025. That's not to say that we're actually going to get to that point, but that is the trajectory that young men in college are in now. They are disappearing quickly.
I wish I had more time to follow up on that one, because I enjoy the conversation. We'll pay attention to what's going on, and we'll reach out to you again. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Paul Elam, a voice for men. Worth checking out. Some of the pro and con that's offered up on the web on it, and then hopefully enjoy the conversation we just had. Let's wrap up the show in a moment.
Chad Hartman on News Radio 830 WCCO.